Highlights: the shadows under the bleachers. The graffiti-covered trail beneath the bleachers was our shortcut home after practice until the day we found something that didn't belong there. Something everyone insisted couldn't possibly exist: the drama club. The theater storage room's single flickering bulb cast strange shadows across the costume racks as I sorted through the donations, unaware that the breathing sound I'd been ignoring wasn't just the old ventilation system. The yearbooks. When Mr. Novak instructed me to catalog the old yearbooks in the archive closet, I thought the worst part would be the dust, not the unsettling pattern I'd discover in the class photos spanning decades. Story 1. The shadows under the bleachers. The graffiti-covered trail beneath the bleachers was our shortcut home after practice, until the day we found something that didn't belong there, something everyone insisted couldn't possibly exist. Coach Peterson's conditioning sessions always ran late, leaving us jogging across the darkening football field as sunset painted the metal bleachers in deep orange. The smart route home was around the school parking lot and down Westfield Avenue, but that added 15 minutes we didn't want to spend in our sweaty practice clothes. So we, Amber, Dion, and I always cut under the home side bleachers through the narrow dirt path that generations of students had worn down between the concrete supports. The underside of the bleachers was a museum of teenage expression, layer upon layer of spray-painted declarations of love, crude drawings, and senior class mottos dating back decades. We knew every inch of that shortcut, which is why we immediately noticed when something changed. It was a Tuesday in late October, unusually cold for our area. Practice had run even later than normal, and true darkness had fallen by the time we started our trek home. Did they add a storage closet under here? Amber asked, pointing to a section of the bleachers we passed hundreds of times before. What looked like a door hadn't been there yesterday, a rectangular outline in the concrete foundation wall, visible only because the thick darkness was in contrast to its edges. "That's not a door," Dion said, moving closer. "It's just a weird shadow." We all approached to investigate. It was definitely a door, or rather an opening where the concrete should have been solid. The gap was about 3 feet wide and 6 feet tall, the edges unnaturally straight, as though a perfect rectangle had been cut from the foundation. "This is impossible," I said. "This wall is solid concrete. They can't just cut through it overnight. Were there posters or something on this side that might have covered this?" When Dion shone his light directly into the opening, we could see it wasn't a door at all, but a passage, a narrow corridor extending back into darkness. "Maybe it's maintenance access," Amber suggested, though her voice betrayed her doubt. I leaned my head in cautiously, trying to see where the passage led. The corridor stretched only a few feet before turning sharply left. The walls were bare concrete, unmarked by the graffiti that covered everything else under the bleachers. The air flowing from the opening was noticeably colder than the autumn evening around us. "We should report this," Amber said, stepping back. "What if some homeless person is living under the bleachers? Or students made a hidden hangout spot?" Dion added. As we debated what to do, we heard footsteps from inside the passage, slow, dragging steps approaching the turn. We froze, listening intently. The footsteps stopped. Then, a low, rasping sound like labored breathing or someone trying to speak through damaged vocal cords. We backed away quickly, nearly tripping over each other. "Hello," Dion called out, trying to sound authoritative. "This is private school property." A strange scraping sound started moving closer. Someone was lurking in the shadows, dragging one foot. Maybe that's what the scraping sound was. We didn't wait to see more. We ran, sprinting around the bleachers toward the school building rather than continuing on our usual route. We found Mr. Garcia, the evening custodian, emptying trash cans by the gym entrance and breathlessly tried to explain what we'd seen. He looked concerned, but not about the passage. "You kids shouldn't be under the bleachers at night. That whole area is scheduled for renovation. There's exposed rebar and construction equipment everywhere." "But we saw someone," I insisted. "Or something." Mr. Garcia radioed security and Officer Reyes met us at the gym. Officer Reyes sighed. "Look, the mind plays tricks in the dark. Shadows can look like doorways. Maybe you heard an animal." We couldn't convince them of what we'd seen, and eventually, we were sent home with a warning to use the proper pathways after dark. I spent hours researching the school's history that night, finding nothing unusual except a brief mention that the original building had been constructed over the site of an old county workhouse that had burned down in the 1930s. The next day at school, we agreed to check again in daylight. But as we approached the bleachers after class, we found the entire area cordoned off with construction tape. Started the renovation early, Coach Peterson explained during practice. Foundation issues they need to address immediately. We'll be using the visitor bleachers for the rest of the season. We never used our shortcut again, and within weeks, the renovation was complete, the entire foundation replaced with new concrete that remained stubbornly free of graffiti, despite efforts from the student body. Sometimes during home games, I find myself staring at that section of bleachers, remembering the impossible doorway and those inhuman sounds. For my own sanity, I've convinced myself we were tired and saw shadows where there were none. Story 2. The Drama Club. I volunteered for the drama club's costume department because it looked good on college applications, not because I had any actual interest in theater. That's how I ended up alone in the back storage room on a Friday afternoon, while everyone else was at the pep rally. The theater storage room's single flickering bulb cast strange shadows across the costume racks as I sorted through the donations, unaware that the breathing sound I'd been ignoring wasn't just the old ventilation system. Mrs. Reeves had dumped 3 garbage bags of community donations on the floor before rushing off to supervise the drama club's fundraising booth. "Just sort these by decade and potential use," she'd said. "I'll check on you before I leave." The storage room was a converted janitor's closet, narrow, windowless, and perpetually damp. Costumes from shows dating back to the 1980s hung on metal racks, their fabrics musty with age. The ventilation system made odd rattling noises that echoed in the confined space. I worked methodically, creating piles of usable vintage clothes and discarding the truly hopeless items. The single overhead bulb flickered occasionally, making the shadows dance across the walls. But after about an hour, I noticed the rhythm of the ventilation sounds had changed. What had been mechanical rattling now seemed more like breathing. I paused, holding a polyester disco shirt, and listened. The sound stopped. I resumed sorting, and it started again, a soft inhale-exhale pattern just barely audible over the distant cheers from the gymnasium. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice sounded small in the cluttered room. No answer came. But when I turned back to the costume rack, a sequined gown that had definitely been on the left end was now hanging in the center. I blinked, questioning my memory. Had I moved it earlier? The lighting was poor, and I'd been working quickly. As I reached for the dress, something shifted in the shadows behind the rack. I froze, hand outstretched. "Mrs. Reeves." I called again, with forced casualness. The racks were positioned against the back wall. There shouldn't have been space for anyone to stand behind them. I backed toward the door, trying to appear calm while my heart hammered in my chest. "I'm going to get some water," I announced to the empty room. "I'll be right back." I reached for the doorknob, but it turned before I touched it. The door swung open, revealing the elderly janitor, Mr. Kwan. I gasped, startled by his sudden appearance. "Sorry," he said, equally surprised. "Didn't know anyone was in here, just doing my rounds." I glanced back at the costume racks. Nothing moved. "Actually," I said, lowering my voice, "I think someone might be hiding in here. I keep hearing strange sounds." Mr. Kwan frowned and entered the room, flipping the light switch a few times to stop the flickering. "This room," he said, shaking his head. "Bad wiring, worse plumbing." He walked to the back wall and pushed aside the clothing racks with practiced ease. Nothing was there except water stains creeping up the concrete. But when he moved the last rack, we discovered a narrow maintenance shaft built into the wall, its access panel hanging open. "This should be locked," Mr. Kwan muttered, peering into the dark, vertical passage. The shaft appeared to run up through the building, with metal rungs embedded in one wall. A cool draft carried the scent of mildew from below. "Where does it go?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. "Connects all the floors for plumbing access. Goes down to the sub-basement too, but nobody uses that anymore. Too flooded." He secured the panel with a padlock from his belt. "Probably raccoons got in again. They can sound almost human sometimes." I nodded, relieved to have an explanation. We finished moving the racks back into place, and I helped close up the storage room for the weekend. As we left, he mentioned casually, 20 years ago, they caught a homeless man living in the walls. Used to come out at night, take food from the cafeteria. Harmless guy, just needed shelter." I laughed nervously. "That's creepy." Mr. Kwan shrugged. "I didn't go back to the storage room until Monday, when I was safely surrounded by other drama students. The breathing sounds had stopped, and I convinced myself it had been raccoons or the pipes all along." Story 3. The yearbooks. When Mr. Novak instructed me to catalog the old yearbooks in the archive closet, I thought the worst part would be the dust, not the unsettling pattern I'd discover in the class photos spanning decades. My community service hours were due by the end of the semester, and the school librarian's office seemed perfect, organized the chaotic yearbook archives, and he'd sign off on all 40 hours I needed to graduate. No one's properly sorted these since the 90s, Mr. Novak explained, unlocking a door behind the reference desk. Just put them in chronological order and make a spreadsheet noting any that are damaged or missing. The archive closet was larger than I expected, a narrow room with shelves stretching from floor to ceiling, crammed with yearbooks dating back to the school's founding in 1946. Two metal filing cabinets stood against the back wall, and a small desk with an ancient computer occupied one corner. The Wi-Fi doesn't reach back here, Mr. Novak apologized, but the computer works for the spreadsheet. I'll check on you when I can, but I'm the only one staffing the library today. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with decades of smiling student photos and the musty smell of old paper. I started systematically, removing books from shelves and arranging them by year on the desk. The work was tedious but straightforward. While flipping through a 1973 yearbook, I noticed something odd about the senior portraits. One photo, a boy named Richard Mercer, had been deliberately scratched out with pen, his face completely obliterated. Kids defacing yearbooks wasn't unusual, but when I checked the 1972 book, I found his junior portrait similarly destroyed. I became curious and started checking other years. The pattern continued backwards. In every yearbook from 1970 to 1973, Richard Mercer's photo had been methodically defaced. Then he disappeared from the records entirely. What really unsettled me was finding another student, Catherine Weller, with the same treatment, and another, James Hoffman, from 2001 to 2004. I began checking every yearbook, creating a separate list of defaced students. 8 names emerged across 5 decades. Each appeared for several years with their photos destroyed, then vanished completely. There was no pattern to their activities or apparent social circles. Different sports, clubs, academic tracks. I was so absorbed that I jumped when the computer suddenly turned on, like 10 minutes after I had pushed the power button and forgotten about it. The ancient machine slowly started humming to life. The screen glowed blue, then displayed a yearbook database on the desktop. When I explored the database, searching for the names on my list, every record contained the same official note: transfer. Incomplete records. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I shut down the machine and decided to ask Mr. Novak about these students. When I opened the archive door, the library was dark except for emergency lights. Hours had passed, and closing time had come and gone without my noticing. My phone showed no service in the windowless room. I hurried through the silent library, trying to quell my rising panic. The main doors were locked from the outside, but I knew that the staff exit beside the reference desk would open from inside with a push bar. As I approached the desk, I noticed a file box I hadn't seen before, sitting prominently with a label: Permanent Record Deletions, Administrative Eyes Only. I heard a key turn in the main library doors. I ran for the emergency exit, setting off the alarm as I burst into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached the main street. The next day, Mr. Novak acted normal, thanking me for starting the archive organization. When I mentioned finding patterns of defaced photos, he looked puzzled. That's strange. I'll have to check those out. The archive door remained locked for the remainder of the year. Mr. Novak signed off on my community service hours without requiring me to finish the project. I don't know what happened to those students, or why every few years they seemed to disappear from the archives and someone was furious enough to deface their remaining photos. Maybe it was just the creepy vibes I got from the archives closet or the late hour, but in the moment, I could have sworn there was something more sinister behind those strange patterns that I wasn't willing to stick around to find out. That's the end of today's stories. What's the strangest, unexplained thing you ever encountered at your school that no one else seemed to notice or acknowledge? Let me know in the comments below the like and subscribe buttons.